Hey guys, tonight we step straight into the cold, literally, as you ease your mind into a medieval morning where the concept of a refreshing start involves temperatures that would make your modern shower groan in protest. You stand there, right at the edge of a tiny wooden wash stall in a frost-tipped village, watching a villager splash icy water onto their face as if it's the most normal thing in the world. It's early, the sun hasn't fully committed to rising, and the air is crisp enough that your breath drifts out in little clouds. And yes, you probably wouldn't survive this before breakfast, but that's part of the charm. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and the time you're watching this. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice as you trudge toward the wash stall is the smell of damp wood and that faint metallic tang of cold water drawn from a nearby stream. It's not filtered, heated, or piped through anything. It's just water, and it's freezing. The wooden bucket looks like it was carved by someone with a questionable relationship to geometry, but it does the job. A thin layer of ice clings to the edge. You can tap it with your finger and feel it crack like a tiny window pane. This is your introduction to medieval cold exposure. No fancy chromotherapy, no spa playlist that claims to cleanse your aura, and definitely no influencer telling you to embrace discomfort. Just necessities. People use cold water because it was the only water they had. And surprisingly, they got pretty good at pretending it wasn't absolutely miserable. A villager, let's call him Auric, gives you a nod that somehow manages to be both polite and slightly amused. He's already dipped his hands into the icy bucket, splashing his face like he's trying to wake up every cell in his body at once. You watch the droplets run down his cheeks and disappear into his russet wool tunic. He does this every morning, he tells you, not because he's chasing mental clarity, improved circulation, or a stronger immune system. Though ironically, historians still argue whether this daily shock actually did strengthen resilience, but simply because cold water is the only water that isn't frozen solid elsewhere. You crouch down near the bucket, feeling the chill radiating off of it. A small part of you wonders whether medieval people built up some immunity to freezing temperatures. But no. Auric shivers, just like you. He just does it with dignity. You, by comparison, look like someone mentally drafting their last will. Still, there's something calming about the scene. The soft crunch of frost under your boots, the distant sound of a rooster who's far too enthusiastic for this time of day, and the way the early sunlight barely kisses the rooftops. A thin trail of smoke curls out of a nearby chimney, promising warmth that you're definitely not getting out here. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barks in that half-awake tone dogs use when they're not committed to the effort. Auric gestures toward the bucket, as if to say, "Your turn." He's polite about it, but you can tell he's waiting for the show. You dip your fingers in first. The shock hits instantly. Icy needles up your arm, the kind of cold that makes your brain flicker like a lantern running low on oil. You try to act natural, but your expression betrays you. Congratulations, you've just invented the medieval version of the cold plunge reaction video. One historical fact slips into your mind. Medieval people genuinely believed cold water helped balance bodily humors. They thought warming up too quickly after sleeping could cause headaches, or even melancholy vapors. It sounds silly to you, but then again, you probably follow at least one wellness trend that future generations will laugh at, so maybe don't judge too harshly. As you splash your face, very cautiously, you feel the water drip down your neck and into your shirt in the most unpleasant way possible. Auric gives an approving grunt, as if you've just passed a test. A fringe tidbit comes to mind. Some medieval physicians recommended cold water as a way to sharpen memory. They didn't know why, of course, but maybe they stumbled onto something. After all, you will absolutely remember this moment for the rest of your life. You stand up, wiping your hands on your sleeves, which only makes them colder. The wind picks up a little, brushing across your wet skin, and you swear you can feel your soul trying to exit your body just to warm itself somewhere else. A woman passing by smirks knowingly. She's carrying a wicker basket filled with frozen laundry, which she's about to thaw near the hearth. You get the sense she's seen many outsiders react dramatically to a simple morning wash. As the village slowly wakes, you take in the surroundings. Stone cottages with crooked wooden beams, chickens scratching the frozen ground, children rubbing their hands together for warmth. No one seems particularly bothered by the cold water routine. It's simply woven into the rhythm of the day, like stretching or yawning. You wander a bit farther, stepping over a patch of crunchy frost. A few villagers gather around another wash spot near a trough. Someone jokes that if you splash water on your face fast enough, you'll scare away evil spirits before breakfast. Historians still argue whether this was actually believed or just early morning humor, but either way, it adds charm to the scene. You feel the faintest sense of admiration for their resilience. They didn't choose cold exposure because it was trendy or because someone on a podcast said it would boost dopamine. They embraced it because it was part of life, unavoidable, unheated, and strangely grounding. As you stand there, letting the cold settle on your skin like a thin veil, you realize something unexpectedly soothing. This simple ritual, harsh as it seems, slows your thoughts. The cold pulls you into the present moment, leaving no room for stress or lingering worries. It's the medieval version of mindfulness, though they would have called it something like clearing the morning vapors. Your fingers begin to regain feeling, just slightly. The sky brightens a bit more, shifting from pale gray to soft gold. You watch a villager hang a bucket on a wooden peg, water droplets sparkling like tiny crystals. Your breath steadies. The morning no longer feels hostile. It feels alive. You might never fully adopt a medieval cold water routine, but for now, you let the chill wrap around you gently, like a strangely invigorating lullaby. And with that, you begin to wander deeper into the day, the story flowing onward. You leave the frostbitten wash stall behind, stepping slowly toward the heart of the village where a squat, timber-framed building leans a little too far to the left, as if it's trying to eavesdrop on passersby. This, you're told, is the bathhouse, though bathhouse might be false advertising. You push open the creaking wooden door and enter a dim space warmed only by the faint glow of a few lanterns hanging from iron hooks. The air feels slightly humid, but not warm enough to lull anyone into comfort. It's the kind of humidity you get when cold water has been sloshed around for hours, like a medieval attempt at a sauna that gave up halfway through the idea. You step inside, and the room greets you with a familiar medieval scent, wood smoke, wet wool, and the earthy tang of water drawn from wells that have definitely seen better days. A row of wooden tubs is pushed against one wall, but here's the twist. They're mostly empty. Only a few inches of cold water sit in the bottoms, shimmering faintly in the lantern glow. Bathing, in the medieval sense, often meant a quick splash and not a luxurious soak. You moisturize more taking a 10-second walk through a grocery store misting machine. A few townsfolk are here already. One woman in a saffron tunic is wringing out a cloth with practiced ease, her face set in a tired but content expression. A man with a teal cloak draped over his shoulders stands beside a tub, dipping a wooden ladle into the water. He splashes himself rhythmically. Face, arms, neck repeat. It's not relaxing. It's efficient. He nods politely at you, and you nod back, as though acknowledging the shared struggle of pretending freezing water isn't that bad. You notice his hands turning slightly red from the cold, the color blooming across his knuckles like chilly flowers. Still, he goes on without complaint. That, you think, is medieval resilience or denial. Historians still argue whether medieval people simply tolerated discomfort better, or just didn't have the vocabulary to express their misery without sounding ungrateful. A young girl sits nearby on a little bench, kicking her feet and watching the adults. She holds a small carved wooden duck, one of those toys children have probably been losing under furniture for centuries. She giggles when a man splashes himself a little too hard and sputters. Even in the Middle Ages, slapstick comedy is undefeated. You take a few steps further in, letting your eyes adjust to the dim light. The lanterns cast long shadows across the stone floor, and the sound of dripping water echoes gently. It's not exactly soothing, but it has that repetitive, meditative quality, like listening to a leaky faucet at 2 a.m. when you're too tired to fix it but too awake to fully ignore it. Someone hands you a cloth. You're not sure whether they're offering help or implying that you look like someone who badly needs a wash. Either way, you take it. The cloth is coarse but clean, likely washed with lye soap that smells faintly of herbs. You dip it cautiously into the tub. The cold spreads through the fabric instantly, and when you press it to your face, the sensation jolts you like a caffeinated slap. The woman in the saffron tunic laughs softly. "Best way to wake," she says. Her accent is thick, her tone friendly. You believe her, but only because the alternative is passing out from shock. A mainstream historical fact floats into your mind. Many medieval European bathhouses once included hot baths during earlier centuries, especially in Roman-influenced regions. But over time, thanks to dwindling infrastructure, limited fuel, moral concerns, and the occasional fear that warm water opened the pores to disease, hot bathing became less common. Cold rinsing, on the other hand, stuck around stubbornly. It was affordable, accessible, and required no firewood that could instead be used for cooking or staying alive. Still, some towns attempted communal warm baths during festivals or special days. But most ordinary mornings, cold, always cold. You're starting to see why your modern shower feels like a spoiled miracle. You watch as a pair of workers enters the bathhouse, their boots leaving damp marks on the floor. One dunks his entire head into a tub, just drops it straight in, with the confidence of someone who has definitely lost multiple bets in his life. He comes up shaking his hair like a dog, sending droplets everywhere. The girl with the wooden duck squeals in delight and covers her face. A fringe tidbit surfaces. Some medieval bathhouses doubled as informal social clubs. People traded gossip here, made deals, shared news, and sometimes even recited poems. It wasn't unusual for someone to tell you their entire life story, while you were awkwardly trying to keep the water from running down your sleeves. You glance around and realize the same vibe is present here. Small conversations hum across the room like the gentle buzzing of bees. One older woman dips her feet into a shallow tub and sighs, the sound halfway between relief and resignation. "Cold keeps me alert," she says to no one in particular. "Warm water makes you sleepy. I can't be sleepy." She lifts her foot out of the water and wiggles her toes. They are, in your professional opinion, slightly frozen. She doesn't seem bothered. You make your way toward a corner where a small window lets in a sliver of daylight. Through it, you see the village square bustling slowly awake. Farmers drag sacks across the ground. Chickens fuss over invisible concerns, and a dog is enthusiastically barking at a wheelbarrow. Everything feels ordinary yet oddly comforting, like a sleepy painting beginning to stir. Another villager approaches you with a bucket. "Water?" he asks. You instinctively brace yourself, but before you can decline, he lifts the bucket and pours a small trickle into one of the tubs. The water glints, perfectly clear, reflecting the lantern light like a tiny mirror. You thank him anyway, partially because he seems kind, partially because you're trying to avoid any more accidental showers. Then, in the middle of all this cold chaos, something quietly poetic happens. A few droplets slip from the ladle onto the lantern flame. Instead of extinguishing it, the lantern flickers softly, glowing warmer for a heartbeat before steadying again. A reminder that even in chill and discomfort, warmth has a habit of returning. You close your eyes for a moment, breathing in the cool, damp air. There's a rhythm to the space, the splash, the drip, the soft chatter. It's not a spa. It's not luxurious, but it's honest, practical, human, and strangely, a little soothing. Maybe it's the repetition. Maybe it's the closeness. Maybe it's the sense that for centuries, people started their days in exactly this way. Waking up with water that could practically hurt you, laughing about it when they could, tolerating it when they couldn't. You tuck the cloth back onto the edge of the tub. Your hand stings slightly as the air cools the lingering moisture, but you don't mind as much now. You've adapted, slightly, very slightly. As you step out of the bathhouse and into the pale morning light, the cold outside no longer feels like a threat. It feels like a continuation, a natural extension of everything you've just witnessed. The village hums with life, and with each breath you take, the chill sinks deeper into your awareness. Not harsh, but refreshing, slow, grounding. You move forward, ready for the next corner of this medieval day, letting the cold guide your steps as the story flows onward. And as you imagine that young samurai whisking his bowl of matcha, you can almost feel the rhythm, the quiet, circular motion, the soft tap as the bamboo whisk touches the edge of the cup. It's strange how something so simple, so ordinary, can hold so much meaning. Because for the samurai, this wasn't just a drink. It wasn't a treat. It wasn't a luxury. It was a moment. A small pause between everything that demanded strength, discipline, and duty. A reminder that before he was a warrior, he was a human being. And when you think about it like that, it starts to make sense why this ritual stayed alive for centuries. Why it spread beyond warriors and into villages. Why monks adopted it. Why poets wrote about it. Why travelers search for tea houses the way we look for coffee shops today. Because everyone, no matter the era, no matter the culture, no matter the responsibilities on their shoulders, needs a place to breathe. Just like the samurai. Imagine him now, stepping outside a wooden training hall after a long morning. The floor behind him still humming with the energy of sparring. His body warm, his breath controlled, but slightly tired. And instead of rushing back into another task, he walks toward a quiet porch overlooking a small garden. The leaves tremble in a gentle breeze. A stream murmurs somewhere, just out of sight. And waiting for him is that familiar bowl, the same one he's held 1,000 times before. It's a reminder that peace doesn't need to be dramatic. It doesn't need a perfect setting. It doesn't need permission. Sometimes, peace is just a warm cup held between your hands. And maybe that's why this ritual survived. Because when humans find something that works, something that helps them reconnect, something that makes them feel grounded, they protect it. They pass it on. They share it with the next generation. Even now, hundreds of years later, people still drink matcha for the same reason the samurai did. To slow down, to reset, to return to themselves. And there's something comforting about that. Knowing that the world changes, technology changes, routines change. But the need for quiet never does. It's easy to forget that in modern life, we live in a world full of rushing. Notifications, expectations, noise. Schedules packed so tightly that even resting can start to feel like another task on the list. But somewhere inside you, that ancient part of you that has existed since long before cities and screens, still responds to the same things the samurai did. Warmth, stillness, ritual, repetition, moments that don't ask anything of you except to be present. You can imagine the steam rising gently, the earthy scent drifting upward, the surface of the tea reflecting soft light. Nothing complicated, nothing demanding, just an invitation. And maybe tonight, while you listen, your mind can wander into that same quiet space. A place where everything slows down, even if just for a few minutes. Because that's all a ritual really is. A doorway, a soft transition from one state to another, from tension to calm, from alertness to rest, from thinking to drifting. And as you listen to the sound of this story, you might notice your breath following its own rhythm. Not forced, not controlled, just naturally slowing, softening, settling, almost like you're whisking your own mind into stillness. The samurai believed that a calm mind led to clear decisions. Clear decisions led to better outcomes. And better outcomes led to a peaceful life. You don't need a warrior's discipline to feel that. You only need a moment, like this one, to let everything drop away. While he sat on that porch centuries ago, he wasn't thinking about battles, or training, or expectations. He was letting the warmth of the tea melt away the tension in his shoulders. He was letting the silence of the garden settle into him. He was letting his thoughts untangle, one by one, until they dissolve into nothing but simple awareness. And maybe you can feel something similar now. That gentle unwinding, that soft release, that sense that your mind doesn't need to carry everything at once. Because the funny thing is, the world often teaches us to speed up, to push harder, to multitask, to stay productive. But ancient rituals, the ones that survived centuries, remind us of the opposite. They whisper, slow down, be still, let things settle. The samurai knew this. Monks knew this. Travelers knew this. And now you know it too. As you continue listening, let the atmosphere get heavier, in a good way. Like a blanket gently placed over your thoughts. Like the evening air cooling the world around a quiet garden. Like calm settling into your chest, slow and steady. And if your eyes get a little heavier, that's okay. If the words start blending together, that's okay. If your mind begins to drift into its own peaceful scenery, that's exactly what it's supposed to do. Because this story isn't just about matcha, or samurai, or history. It's about finding a small pocket of stillness in a world that rarely gives us one. A moment where nothing is required of you except to breathe, and maybe imagine a warm cup resting quietly between your hands. And as that warm cup rests in your imagination, you might notice something subtle happening inside you. A loosening, a soft melting, as if every part of your mind that was holding itself tightly finally realizes it doesn't need it anymore. The samurai understood this instinctively, not because someone taught it to them, not because a scroll explained it, but because life demanded balance. They lived in a world full of pressure, uncertainty, discipline, and vigilance. And yet, in the middle of all that intensity, they created rituals that were the complete opposite. Quiet, gentle, unhurried. They honored the idea that strength comes from stillness, not tension. So when a samurai lifted that bowl of matcha, he wasn't chasing energy, or productivity, or performance. He was reminding himself that he was allowed to pause, just like you are now. And it's interesting to think about how universal that need is. Different cultures, distant places, different centuries. Yet all of them seem to arrive at the same truth. Humans need softness. Humans need slowness. Humans need moments where the world fades into the background, and the only thing left is sensation, breath, warmth, silence. In ancient China, scholars brewed tea leaves slowly, so they could think clearly. In the Arab world, people gathered around coffee, not for energy, but for connection. In Scandinavia, steam baths were used, not for luxury, but for peace. And in Japan, the samurai whisked matcha in silence, letting the quiet seep into their bones. It wasn't about the drink. It was about who they became while drinking it. And maybe, as you listen, you can become something softer too. Someone breathing just a little slower. Someone thinking just a little less. Someone settling into themselves with a kind of gentle permission. Because the world might ask for your attention, your energy, your effort. But right now, none of that is needed. Right now, the only thing here is a voice guiding you into the calm the samurai once knew. Imagine the air around him. Cool, quiet, filled with the faint scent of pine. Imagine the smooth wood beneath him as he sits on the angwa, the porch that bridges the inside and the outside. Imagine the early morning light, soft enough to make everything feel slightly slow, slightly dreamy, slightly unreal. And then there's the tea, vibrant green, almost glowing in the bowl, steam rising like a small ghost. That vanishes into the air before it can be touched. He blows gently across the surface, not rushing, not pushing time, just allowing the moment to unfold at the pace nature intended. And as he takes the first sip, the warmth spreads through him, the way calm spreads through you now, slowly at first, then deeply, then completely. Maybe you can feel a similar warmth, gathering in your chest, in your shoulders, in your body, a heaviness that isn't tiredness, but release, a kind of melting that tells you you're safe to let go. Tonight, you get to do what a samurai once did. You get to step out of the noise and into something quieter, something simpler, something made for you. Because no matter how different your life may be, your mind is still human. It still responds to small rituals, to slow breathing, to soft images, to warm thoughts. You might imagine holding that bowl yourself now, your fingers curling around it, feeling the faint texture of the clay, the steady warmth beneath your hands. Your breath naturally falls into a calmer rhythm. Your body begins to settle, like dust floating down in a beam of light. Everything that once felt sharp starts to blur at the edges. And that's okay. That's good. That's what this moment is for. The samurai had a saying: the mind is like water. When it is agitated, it is hard to see. When it becomes calm, the answer becomes clear. But tonight, you don't need answers. You don't need clarity. You don't need anything except the calm. The kind of calm that comes when you stop trying to be awake. The kind that gathers when you give your thoughts permission to slow and soften and fade. Let them drift now. Let them wander the way leaves drift on a quiet river. Let them float past, without grabbing them, without following them, just watching them dissolve into stillness. If your eyes are getting heavier, you can let them close. If your breath is getting deeper, you can let it guide you downward. If your thoughts are fading into soft shapes and half dreams, That's completely natural, because you are moving into the same quiet the samurai once protected, the same inner space they entered before battle, before writing poetry, before resting, before deciding anything at all. A space where nothing is expected, nothing is required, nothing is asked of you. Just being here is enough. Let that warm, quiet spread now, through your chest, your arms, your legs, your mind, like soft green tea, filling the body with gentleness. There is nowhere else you need to be, nothing else you need to do, just this quiet moment, and the slow, steady drift into deeper and deeper calm, which is why, by the time you ease your way into the next moment of the journey, you're already drifting in that half-dream haze where the past doesn't feel like history anymore. It feels close, familiar, almost like a memory you once had, but forgot you lived. You're still walking that same medieval path, still feeling the faint crunch of frost beneath your feet, still breathing the crisp morning air that smells like pine, wood smoke, and a little bit of please don't let me slip on this ice. And the funny thing, you're getting used to it. The cold isn't attacking you anymore. It's greeting you like an overly enthusiastic relative, uncomfortable at first, but weirdly comforting once you settle in. Ahead of you, a small stone cottage leans slightly to the left, like it's been gossiping with the wind for too many centuries. From inside, you hear the soft clinking of iron pots, the low hum of someone who has accepted winter as a lifestyle, not a season. And this is where the next part of your journey unfolds. The part where you discover how deeply medieval people believed in cold as medicine, magic, and sometimes pure personality development. You push open the door, and the warmth hits you. Gentle, smoky, the kind that wraps around your shoulders like a wool cloak that has absolutely no plans to let go. An elderly healer looks up at you. Her hair is silver, braided with thin scraps of indigo cloth. Her hands are stained with herbs, and her expression says, very clearly, you look like someone who hasn't bathed in a temperature higher than disappointment. She gestures you inside without a word, probably because she's already diagnosing you based solely on the snowflakes stuck to your eyelashes. Medieval healers took one look at a person and thought, yes, definitely needs to be plunged into freezing water. Also could use a ritual prayer, maybe some moss. This was the golden age of extremely confident guesses. And speaking of confidence, here comes your historical fact of the section. Medieval physicians genuinely believed that quick, shocking dips in cold water could rebalance the body's humors. Not emotions, actual body juices with personalities. And while the science behind that was, let's say, creative, the effect of the cold was real. It woke people up. It snapped them out of illness. It forced the body to respond, to adapt, to strengthen. Modern wellness influencers call it biohacking. Medieval villagers simply called it Tuesday. The healer leads you to a small wooden bench, then hands you a cup of something that smells like mint mixed with courage. You'll need this, she says, which is never a comforting phrase. You sip. It tastes like every plant that has ever grown within a 5-mile radius. Not bad, exactly, just assertive. Like the herds are trying to remind you who's in charge. And while you drink, she explains her philosophy. The body thrives when challenged gently. Expose it to cold in short bursts, and it becomes stronger, resilient, balanced. You don't pamper it, you teach it. As she talks, you realize this little cottage is part apothecary, part school, part community therapy center, hanging bundles of rosemary dry above your head. A mortar filled with crushed lavender sits on the table. Wooden buckets line the wall, still dripping from being filled moments before with very, very cold river water. Why not warm water? You ask. She gives you the kind of look someone gives when you suggest using a fork to eat soup. Warm water is for comfort, she says. But cold water? Cold teaches. And then she smiles, a slow, almost mischievous smile that makes you suspect you're about to experience something that will either greatly improve your life or make you loudly reconsider every decision you've ever made. She gestures toward a back door. You'll want to see the river. Of course there's a river. Medieval wellness culture didn't do lukewarm. It didn't do mild discomfort. It did full send. You step outside, and the cold greets you again, sharper now, more awake, almost humming with energy. The sky stretches above you in pale winter blue, and the river rushes past with a sound like distant applause. The water is clear, fast, and very obviously freezing. And here's your quirky historical tidbit. Some medieval villagers believed that winter rivers were guarded by tiny frost spirits who blessed bathers brave enough to enter. Were they real? Historians still argue whether this was a genuine belief, a regional myth, or an early form of peer pressure disguised as spirituality. Either way, it's a charming thought that maybe winter itself is alive, watching you, judging your bravery, and awarding invisible points like a frosty medieval video game. The healer steps beside you, dipping her hand into the stream without flinching. The shock wakes the mind, she says. The cold strengthens the heart. The breath becomes the bridge between fear and calm. It sounds poetic, inspirational, beautiful. And then she looks at you and says, with absolutely no humor, "Your turn." You slowly remove your boots, your breath already fogging around you. The rocks beneath your feet are cold, smooth, and unreasonably confident. The water rushes in front of you, daring you, taunting you, whispering, "Come on in, hero. What's the worst that could happen?" You take one step. Cold, sharp, immediate, like being high-fived by winter's bony hand. You take another. Your breath catches. Your muscles tighten. Your brain briefly considers filing a complaint. But in that moment, something unexpected happens. There's clarity. Not the peaceful, all is well clarity, but the wide-awake, "Whoa, I have a body," clarity. And the healer nods approvingly, as if she's watching a flower bloom. "This is where the mind learns," she says. You take another step. Deeper, colder, sharper. Your breath becomes a rhythm. Fast, then steady, then strangely calm. Your thoughts begin to quiet, softened by the shock. The world narrows until all that's left is the sensation of cold and the steady pull of the river. And in that narrowing, something soft appears. A quiet, a peace. Not from warmth, but from surrender. Your whole body exhales. Your mind stops pushing. The cold becomes less of an enemy, and more a teacher. And you realize the healer was right. This isn't about cold water. It's about presence, about waking up, about learning to let sensation move through you without resistance. You stay a moment longer, just enough to feel your heart settle into a new rhythm, just enough to feel your breath deepen, just enough to sense the strange, ancient wisdom in the ice. When you finally step back onto the bank, the healer wraps a thick wool blanket around your shoulders. The warmth feels earned, like a reward. The world looks clearer, brighter, sharper, and maybe, just maybe, you feel a little different, a little stronger, a little calmer, a little more connected to something older than yourself. As you walk back toward the cottage, wrapped in that blanket, you realize the samurai weren't the only ones who knew how to use discomfort to find peace. Medieval villagers understood it too. The river taught it, the cold taught it, and now, so have you. Wrapped in that wool blanket and still tingling from your accidental ice bath enlightenment, you wander back down the snowy path. The village feels different now, like someone turned up the brightness a little. The thatched roofs gleam with a light frost. The air carries the buttery smell of someone making porridge 2 houses away. Even the chickens look at you like, "Oh, you did the river challenge?" Respect. You continue along the worn road until the cottages thin out and the open countryside stretches ahead, wide and white. And here's where your next medieval adventure sweeps in. Not with drums or trumpets, but with the calm jingle of pack mule bells and the crunch of cart wheels over frost. Because this part of your journey belongs to the travelers. Medieval travelers were basically the original minimalists. One bag, one cloak, and the unwavering belief that any body of water, no matter how freezing, was an acceptable place to freshen up. Whether they were merchants, pilgrims, messengers, or very determined grandmothers with errands, they moved constantly, and they had rituals, routines, and coping mechanisms that make your modern hydration reminders look like amateur efforts. You follow a narrow woodland path that opens into a clearing. A small fire burns low, surrounded by 3 travelers preparing for the day ahead. One adjusts the straps of his pack, another sharpens a short iron knife, and the third, a woman with a russet cloak and the kind of confidence that only comes from walking 20 miles before breakfast, nods at you as if you're late to the meeting. "You want to warm up first," she says, tossing you a ruffled scarf that smells faintly of smoke and pine. We start at the stream. Of course it's the stream. There's always a stream. You join them as they step through the bare winter trees, their boots crunching through patches of icy mud. And here's your mainstream historical fact of the section. Medieval travelers rarely had access to heated water while on the road. So every morning, no matter the season, they performed quick cold water rinses, ablutions, that doubled as hygiene, alertness triggers, and personal resets. Basically, morning routines before coffee existed. They just hurt more. The group stops at a narrow ribbon of water cutting across the forest floor. It's shallow but fast-moving, clear as polished glass. The merchant kneels and splashes his face without hesitation, flinching only in the polite, dignified way of a man pretending this is perfectly normal and not a spiritual crisis. You crouch beside him. He glances at you with the expression of someone who sincerely hopes you don't faint. Short splashes, he advises. Long ones are for saints or fools. You lean forward, your breath fogging in front of you, and dip your hands into the water. Cold, sharp, but after the river experience, your brain goes, "Oh, we know this guy," and the panic subsides faster than you expect. The water bites, but it's familiar now, almost refreshing. You splash your face once, twice, 3 times. Each hit of cold sends little sparks through your mind, waking it up without permission. The woman in the russet cloak nods approvingly. Good. The body remembers. You're not sure whether she means that literally or poetically, but it's comforting either way. As the group continues their morning ritual, something interesting unfolds, something that gives you your quirky historical tidbit for this section. Some travelers believe cold streams had the ability to reset luck. Not cleanse it, not improve it, reset it. Like unplugging and replugging your spiritual device. The ritual involved dipping a small piece of cloth into the cold water and gently wiping the palms, forehead, and the back of the neck. Symbolically, this cleared yesterday's troubles and made space for today's opportunities. Whether it worked, historians still argue whether it was a deep-rooted tradition, a regional superstition, or just the medieval version of my day will go better if I do this small, silly thing. Either way, you have to admit, it sounds soothing. You take a strip of cloth offered by the traveler with the iron knife. It's teal, trimmed with simple stitching. You dip it quickly, because your fingers already know what's coming, and then follow their motions. Palm, forehead, neck. The cold spreads softly across your skin. Not painful, not shocking, just present, clean, awake. And for a moment, you do feel reset. As you stand, the merchant lifts a wooden bucket from the ground, its surface slick with frost. We'll need this filled before we leave, he says. The next wells are far. He hands it to you, because apparently you've become the intern. You step to the stream's edge and lower the bucket, watching the water swirl inside. It fills quickly, growing heavy in your hands, pulling you slightly forward. You brace yourself, lift it, and carry it back to camp where the others nod in approval. It's strange how good that feels. Travelers in the Middle Ages valued competence in quiet, practical things, carrying water, tying ropes, packing gear, reading clouds. Things you never think about unless you need them. Things that make you part of a group not by words, but by simple, shared effort. You warm your hands near the fire as one of the travelers hands you a piece of stale bread softened with hot broth. It's humble, but comforting. The heat sinks into your bones, balancing the cold you've just endured. And as you breathe the steam rising from the bowl, the group begins discussing their route for the day. Where the roads narrow, where the forest thickens, which villages are friendly, which ones have dogs that absolutely will chase you no matter how friendly you are. Then comes the moment you've been waiting for, the calm before motion silence, where the fire crackles, everyone adjusts their cloaks, and the day's first steps are just seconds away. The woman in the russet cloak turns to you again. You walk with us today? She asks, as if the choice is already made. You nod, because you want to see how travelers use cold, not as punishment, not as challenge, but as rhythm, a morning melody, a way of marking time, a way of grounding themselves in a world that changed constantly around them. You fall into step with the group as the fire fades behind you. The forest opens into a long stretch of frost-covered fields. Sunlight glitters on everything, Carts, grass, patches of half-frozen mud. Wind brushes your cheeks with icy fingers, but instead of flinching, you breathe into it. You're starting to understand why medieval travelers embraced discomfort instead of running from it. Sure, they didn't have a choice, but they also had wisdom in their routine, small rituals that anchored them, strengthened them, woke them. The cold doesn't sting as much now. Your breath doesn't catch. Your steps feel lighter. And maybe that's the lesson of this part of the journey. Cold isn't the enemy. It's the reminder, the pause, the reset. And as you walk beside these travelers, listening to their jokes about muddy boots, broken wagon wheels, and the world's most dramatic geese, you feel something else settle in. You're becoming part of the road, part of their rhythm, part of their quiet, daily courage. You keep walking, you keep breathing, and the cold feels almost like a friend. By the time the sun climbs higher, the frost loosens its grip on the fields, and the travelers you've been walking with veer toward a fork in the road. They wave you onward, their silhouettes shrinking against the pale winter glow. And you keep moving, because this journey has a momentum of its own, one that nudges you gently from one medieval scene to the next, like the world is turning the pages for you. The road bends, curves, and rises until it delivers you before a pair of tall timber gates. Dark wood, iron hinges, and a guard wearing a cloak so long it practically sweeps the earth like a very dramatic broom. Behind him, the stone towers of the castle stretch upward, pale and frosty, their tops dusted with snow like someone sprinkled powdered sugar on the entire structure. He eyes you with that classic guard expression. You do not look dangerous, but you definitely look questionable. Then he shrugs and opens the gate. And just like that, you step into a medieval castle courtyard, alive with movement, noise, and the familiar chilly air that follows you like a clingy sidekick. This courtyard isn't the glamorous, golden torchlit kind you see in movies. It's practical, lived in. People hurry across cobblestone paths. Horses snort clouds of steam. A blacksmith hammers rhythmically on glowing iron, the ring echoing through the stone walls. Laundry flaps on lines stretched between towers. Linen shirts smacking each other like passive-aggressive siblings. And right in the center, beneath a wooden awning, sits a long stone basin filled with water, so clear it could double as a medieval lie detector. A squire leans over it, splashing his face with a determined expression that says, "I swear I'm awake. Please stop testing me." Ah yes, you found it. The castle's cold water station. Because here comes your mainstream historical fact of this chapter. Medieval castles did indeed maintain cold water basins in their courtyards or side halls for routine washing, especially in the mornings before training. Knights and squires used them not only to wake up, but to shake off the stiffness of cold nights spent on straw mattresses that had ambitions of being torture devices. The squire notices you watching. "Care to try?" he asks. You shrug. You've done a river. You've done a traveler's stream. At this point, you're basically becoming a cold water sommelier. As you walk closer, the basin reveals its personality. The water is clear, but shimmering with that unmistakable winter bite. You lean over, and immediately flinch forward as a knight claps a freezing wet hand on your shoulder. He grins like a man who deeply enjoys controlled suffering. "First time using the basin?" he asks. You nod, because denying it would be pointless. Knights always know. "Well," he says, grabbing another handful of water, "brace yourself. She's a lively one today." You ask because naming the basin wasn't on your historical bingo card. "Oh yes," the knight replies. "Every basin has a temperament. This one likes to encourage fortitude." By encourage, he clearly means attack. He demonstrates with a splash so violent, he practically slaps himself awake. You take a more cautious approach, leaning down, cupping your hands, bringing the water up slowly. Cold, immediate, a crisp sting across your cheeks. Your eyes widen. Your breath halts for a split second, but then your whole face feels refreshed, bright, sharpened, like your brain just shed 3 layers of sleep and is now contemplating opening a medieval productivity blog. The knight nods approvingly. Sensibility. Good. Most newcomers dunk their whole head and regret it. A squire across the basin raises his hand with the defeated sigh of someone who absolutely dunked his whole head and absolutely regretted it. And here comes your quirky medieval tidbit for this section. Some nobles believe cold water sealed courage into the chest, especially before training or battle. They would splash themselves rhythmically, shoulders, chest, face, in a ritualistic pattern meant to steady the heart. Whether it works psychologically or magically, historians still argue whether it was a genuine belief, an exaggeration by later writers, or just a motivational trick to avoid admitting they were cold and terrified. The knight gestures for you to follow him across the courtyard. You walk past the stable, warm, earthy, filled with the sound of horses snorting like they're judging everyone's life choices. Then he leads you to another cold water feature, a smaller basin in the training yard. This, he says, is where we cool down. You raise an eyebrow. You cool down before training? He laughs. Oh no, after the running, the drills, the sore work, and sometimes before, if we want to feel alive for the second half. You glance at a group of young squires sprinting laps around the yard. Their breath comes out in thick white puffs. When they finish a lap, each one dunks their hands into the basin, shakes them like wet puppies, and keeps running. You watch the routine unfold. A cycle of exertion, chill, breath, focus, in, out, move, cool, run, reset. It's almost meditative. This is how we keep the mind steady, the knight says. Cold sharpens it, teaches discipline, teaches presence. You nod, because after all the cold water you've faced today, you believe him. Then the knight leans closer and lowers his voice like he's revealing a secret. It also stops us from napping on the training field. Don't tell the Lord. He winks, because even knights need micro-naps. You follow him to the far end of the yard where a beautifully carved stone fountain sits beneath a wooden canopy, water spilling from the mouth of a lion carved with a permanently unimpressed expression. The knight gestures dramatically. Behold, the prestige fountain. It's not that different from the other ones. Same water, same temperature, same personality. But nobles love branding. Two noble teenagers ambush the fountain, splashing each other in what appears to be a very high-class water fight. Their silk sleeves are soaked. Their dignity? Questionable. Training their reflexes, the knight says. Or so they claim. You watch the chaos unfold. A carefully controlled chaos that somehow still looks elegant. Their servants shake their heads in the background, holding towels and muttering what must be medieval complaints. Then comes the moment that ties everything together. A senior knight steps out from the shadows of the archway. Tall, weathered, armor dented in the way that says he survived things most people only have nightmares about. He walks to the fountain, places his hands beneath the icy stream, and closes his eyes. His breathing slows. Deep, steady, focused. Everyone, nobles, squires, knights, falls quiet. And in that silence you understand. This isn't a chore. This isn't punishment. This isn't bravado. This is ritual. Anchor. Reset. Presence. Cold water, again and again, reminding them who they are, where they stand, and what strength feels like when it's earned, not assumed. You stand beside him, mimic the gesture, and let the icy cascade run over your fingers. The cold slides across your skin and up your arm like liquid clarity. And once again you feel it. Wakefulness, stillness, balance. The courtyard grows softer. Voices blend with the rustle of banners. Sunlight warms the top of your cloak, and that cold, steady stream becomes another teacher in your journey. You step back, quietly changed yet again. The knight nods. You learn quickly, he says, and with that, the castle gates open behind you, as if sensing it's time for you to continue onward. You take one last breath of crisp winter air, one last glance at the shimmering basin, one last look at the courtyard alive with training, laughter, discipline, and chilly determination. Then you walk on, ready for wherever the cold leads you next. You drift forward into the next stretch of your medieval wanderings, still wrapped in that quiet, sleepy haze, and you find yourself descending a narrow stone staircase into the lower guts of yet another fortress. Because by now, you've basically become a professional at exploring moldy medieval basements. You push open a swollen wooden door, and the cold brushes your face like a cat that doesn't like you, but also doesn't want you to leave. You step in anyway, because of course you do. You're standing in what can only be described as a medieval environmental cold chamber, though no one in the Middle Ages would have had the vocabulary, or the therapy bills, to call it that. They simply thought of it as the room that keeps stuff cold enough not to kill us. But tonight, it becomes something stranger for you, something more like a prelude to all those modern wellness influencers convincing you to dunk yourself in a freezing tubs at 6 a.m. for mental clarity. You inhale. The air is so cold your breath immediately fogs in front of your face, swirling like it's trying to do a dramatic exit from your body. A faint drip echoes in the background, like a slow heartbeat. You step deeper. The floor is packed earth, and it crunches faintly under your boots. There are wooden racks along the walls, covered with salted fish, root vegetables, and a mysterious jar you absolutely refuse to open. And then you notice the stone trough in the center of the chamber, filled with water, so still it looks like polished slate. It's colder than the rivers you've already waded through, colder than the mountain streams you're starting to resent, colder than your phone battery at 3% on a winter morning. This one isn't flowing. It just exists, like a medieval dare. You squat beside it. The surface is perfectly smooth, except for a single tiny leaf floating like it couldn't find a better place to die. Your reflection wobbles back at you, pale and ghostly. You dip a finger in. Bad idea. Your soul almost leaves your body. If Section 3's river felt like an aggressive slap, this feels like someone stuffed your hand into a bag of tiny, angry ice spirits. And yet, as you hold it there for a few seconds longer, something strange happens. You feel the shock give way to a little spark of energy, something bright and buzzing under your skin. Historians still argue whether monks actually used cold rooms for personal endurance or whether they were just stuck with terrible building insulation. But you can already see why someone might voluntarily choose this. You straighten up and glance around again. It's dimly lit by a single torch behind you, its flames shivering. The cold makes everything sharper. The faint grooves carve into the rock walls, the smell of damp herbs drying from twisted ropes, the faint texture of frost creeping along the corners like quiet lace. And as you wander, you start noticing little details that feel suspiciously intentional. A bench carved into the stone, a tiny spout funneling runoff water into the trough, a flat, smooth slab that looks uncomfortably like a sitting platform for someone practicing early cold meditation. You raise a brow. So that whole trend where modern people sit in freezing environments to build resilience may not be as new as the internet claims. Quelle surprise. Of course, not all cold chambers were intentional wellness spas. Some were basically just nature's way of saying, here's your inconvenient reality. A fringe medieval tidbit even claims that some nobles believed sleeping in cold rooms kept their humors balanced, though historians still argue whether that was genuinely held medical belief or just aristocrats trying to flex on commoners like, yes, Gregory, we sleep surrounded by frost because it builds character. You brush your fingertips across the stone. The cold clings to your skin, grounding you, making your heartbeat feel louder. You wander toward the back of the room, where a small rectangular opening near the ceiling lets in a thin blade of moonlight. The light catches floating dust and tiny droplets suspended in the air, turning them into silver sparkles. The whole scene feels like a sleep-deprived painter trying to capture icicle vibes. As you keep walking, your boots splash through a shallow puddle of icy runoff, and you immediately regret everything. But you also feel this weird boost, like your body is using the cold to snap you awake. You mutter to yourself that if medieval peasants could get through this, you can definitely survive your morning shower, even when the water heater acts like a medieval bard who shows up only when he feels like it. You lean your shoulder against a support beam, listening to the faint creak of the wood. Every sound is amplified down here. Even your own breathing sounds dramatic, like you're prepping for some ancient winter ritual, which, honestly, isn't too far off. There were traditions involving winter purification rites across Europe. Celtic, Norse, Slavic, little echoes of beliefs about cold cleansing the body and spirit. Historians still argue whether these practices had any influence on the later Christian ascetic traditions. But tonight, you let the thought drift like frost across a window. Your steps take you to a corner where pieces of broken pottery and wooden ladles lie abandoned. You imagine medieval servants coming down here at dawn, grabbing handfuls of cold water to splash themselves awake before long days of work. Maybe they hated it. Maybe they secretly loved the way it sharpened their senses. Maybe both. Humans have always had this weird love-hate relationship with discomfort, a tendency to poke something unpleasant just to feel alive. You crouch beside the trough again and run your hand over its edge. You can almost see a medieval novice sitting here centuries ago, bracing themselves, dipping their hands, muttering a prayer, or maybe just swearing under their breath. They probably weren't trying to boost their mitochondrial resilience or align their cold exposure circadian cycles. They were just trying to get through the morning. And somehow, that makes the whole thing feel more human. You take a final deep breath. The cold fills your lungs like mint. You stand, letting the shiver run down your spine, letting the moment settle into you like a soft hush. And you realize something. This isn't just history. This is a string that runs from those stone walls to your own daily rituals, from medieval practicality to modern performance, from survival to wellness. You give the chamber one last look, nod respectfully at the leaf still floating like a tiny survivor, and push back through the wooden door. Warm air greets you on the other side like a hug you didn't ask for, but accept anyway. You step out of the cold chamber with a little shiver still traveling down your arms, as if the memory of the frost has decided to hitch a ride for a while. The corridor ahead feels warmer. Not warm, but warmer in the sense that your toes have stopped filing formal complaints. The torchlight flickers along the stone walls, casting a honey-colored glow that feels almost indulgent after the icy blue gloom you just crawled out of. You keep walking, your footsteps softer now, like even the castle senses you've earned a gentler moment. You follow a narrow hallway that curves left, then right, then down a short set of uneven stairs, until finally you push open a heavy oak door banded with iron. And suddenly the world opens up. You're standing at the edge of a medieval courtyard in the earliest blush of dawn. Everything is washed in pale lavender light. The air here is crisp, but not biting. More like a cool morning breeze that's been politely filtered through 1,000 dew-soaked leaves. You inhale, and the smell of damp earth, wood smoke, and distant herbs settles around you. A small group of monks moves across the courtyard, their brown habits swaying softly. They're the picture of serenity, slow, deliberate, peaceful, like they weren't awake at 4 a.m. chanting in a stone hall that echoes like a broken subwoofer. They're heading toward a 400-year-old stone bathhouse on the far side. And, of course, you follow, because at this point you're basically a medieval wellness influencer in training. As you cross the yard, you notice frost glittering on the grass, tiny crystals catching the rising sun like powdered diamonds. A couple of chickens peck lazily at the ground nearby, completely unimpressed by your presence, and equally unimpressed by the concept of human dignity. Somewhere above, a raven gives a croaky caw that sounds like it just woke up and hasn't had its medieval coffee yet. You reach the bathhouse, a round stone structure half sunk into the earth, its walls covered with creeping ivy. A wooden door hangs slightly ajar, letting out a thin ribbon of steam that instantly warms your cheeks. You step inside. The interior is dim, illuminated only by a handful of fat beeswax candles perched on ledges. Their flames waver, casting soft gold over everything. The room smells like rosemary, mint, and something vaguely medicinal, like the monks are trying to cure your soul and your sinuses simultaneously. At the center of the room is a shallow stone pool fed by a narrow pipe of flowing water. And the moment your eyes land on it, you realize the steam was deceiving. Because that water is freezing, not refreshing, not pleasantly brisk. We're talking full, polar bear plunge in January during an argument with your ex levels of cold. The monks slip into the pool without flinching, because of course they do. Meanwhile, you stand at the edge making noises that sound like a teapot trying to achieve enlightenment. One monk, an older man with kind eyes and a braided gray beard, gestures for you to join. You step forward, and your foot sinks into water, so icy you briefly forget your name, your birthday, and all of your childhood hopes. Your skin prickles instantly, your breath catches, and your brain screams something in a mix of panic and betrayal. But then something strange happens. As you lower yourself further, inch by inch, you feel a spreading warmth. Not from the water, obviously, because the water hates you. but from deep inside your chest. A slow, steady heat, a pulse of wakefulness, a clarity that feels suspiciously like what modern wellness blogs call the resilience threshold. Historians still argue whether medieval monks intentionally used cold immersion for mental discipline, or whether it was just the only water they had access to. But here and now it's clear. This practice does something. You settle deeper, the stone floor smooth beneath you, the water swirling gently around your shoulders. The room hums with quiet focus. The monks breathe in slow unison, long inhalations and equally long exhalations, like a chorus of steady tides. You copy them almost automatically, and the rhythm pulls you inward. A mainstream historical fact floats to mind. Monastic orders sometimes practiced bodily mortification, not as punishment, but as a weird kind of mental sharpening. A reminder that the body doesn't run the show. And this cold immersion, it fits perfectly in that tradition. Then you recall a much quirkier historical tidbit. Certain medieval herbalists believed that cold water shocked the humors into balance, especially if you chewed mint while doing it. You glance at the small dish of mint leaves resting by the edge of the pool, and for one horrifying moment, you think they might actually expect you to chew one. Thankfully, no one offers, and you breathe out in relief. As you sit in the water, your mind drifts, not away from the cold, but through it. You notice the candlelight shimmering on the surface, turning ripples into liquid gold. You hear the faint echo of dripping water from the pipe above. You feel your heartbeat steadying, aligning with the quiet inhale-exhale of the monks around you. It's oddly peaceful. You realize this moment, this bizarre, icy meditation, isn't very different from the modern idea of embracing discomfort. All those wellness creators with their tubs full of ice cubes, their timers set to 47 seconds, their motivational captions like, "Rise and freeze, kings." You smirk. Humanity really hasn't changed much. We just gave everything better branding. And as you sit there, thoughts floating like tiny paper boats in a still pond, you imagine medieval novices centuries ago stepping into this same pool, wincing the same way, breathing through the shock, and emerging with a steadier mind. Historians still argue whether these cold immersions were meant to cultivate spiritual resilience or simply to prevent monks from falling asleep during morning prayers. But either way, the result was the same: clarity. Slowly, the cold shifts from something happening to you to something happening with you. A quiet partnership, a gentle tug back into the present moment. The ripples flatten, your breath evens, and for a long, still stretch of time, you exist in perfect silence. Then, when you're finally ready, you rise from the water. Your skin tingles like you're wrapped in static. The air feels warm by comparison, almost soft against your chilled limbs. You wrap yourself in a thick wool cloth hanging nearby, colored a deep russet, coarse but comforting. You step back into the morning courtyard. The sun has risen fully now, casting golden light across the frost-kissed grass. The monks drift away in different directions, calm and purposeful. And you? You feel awake in a way you haven't in a long time, filled with that strange mix of peace and electricity that medieval monks knew long before hashtags existed. You leave the monastery behind with that lingering, alert calm still buzzing under your skin, a kind of medieval espresso shot without the beans, the brew, or the screaming anxiety. The path ahead takes you down a gentle slope lined with winterbear trees. Their branches arch overhead like a quiet cathedral, and the morning light filters through them in soft, sleepy stripes. Your breath blooms in the chilled air as you walk, curling upward in tiny white clouds. Somewhere in the distance, you hear the toll of a bell, slow, deliberate, like it's reminding everyone within 10 miles to take their time. You listen for a moment, letting the sound wrap around you. It feels grounding, like the world is letting you ease into things at your own pace. After a short while, you reach a worn dirt road that winds past frozen fields. And there, moving like a gentle, mismatched river, is a line of travelers, bundled in thick cloaks, carrying staffs, wearing leather boots patched more times than you can count. Pilgrims. They walk with that unmistakable pilgrim shuffle, equal parts determination, exhaustion, and why did I think this was a good idea? Some carry painted badges stitched to their clothing, symbols of saints, shrines, or distant holy sites. Some hum soft hymns under their breath. Others just trudge in resigned silence, the universal language of long-distance walkers since the dawn of time. You step into their flow, unnoticed in the crowd, swept along by the gentle rhythm of feet against frosted ground. One young woman walks beside you, her saffron cloak swaying lightly with each step. She's holding a small wooden bucket, and judging by her complete lack of reaction to its weight, she's been carrying it for a long time. Maybe days, maybe centuries. Pilgrims operate on a different timeline. She smiles at you, a quiet, knowing sort of smile, and gestures ahead to a faint plume of mist rising between two hills. "The spring," she says softly, her voice slightly hoarse from travel. "Cold as judgment, but good for the soul." Well, that sounds inviting. As you crest the hill with the group, the spring comes into view. It's nestled in a rocky hollow, framed by carved wooden beams that someone hammered together 100 years ago and never bothered to repair. The water pools in a wide stone basin, clear as glass and shimmering silver under the pale sun. It's also steaming, not warm steam, but the kind that happens when bitterly cold water meets colder air. A deceptive, tricky kind of steam, the kind that makes you whisper, "Maybe it's not too bad," right before regretting everything. The pilgrims gather around the edge. Some kneel, some murmur prayers. A few dip cupped hands into the water and splash their faces in one swift, heroic act of self-inflicted suffering. And one older man, wrapped in a faded indigo cloak, walks straight into the spring up to his waist like a medieval superhero who's had enough of life's nonsense. You edge closer and kneel as well, feeling the slick stone beneath your knees. The air here is sharper, cooler, humming with that quiet electricity that always comes before a plunge. The wooden bucket the young woman was carrying sits beside you now, filled to the brim with spring water, so clear you can see the reflection of your own hesitation staring back at you. And of course, because you're committed to this journey, and because peer pressure exists across all of human history, you dip your hand into the spring. Instant regret, instant enlightenment, instant full-body freeze. The water is so cold that your fingers go numb on contact. It's the cold that medieval chroniclers would have described as brisk, but only because medieval chroniclers famously lied about everything from weather to battles to fish sizes. Still, as your hand stays there, something shifts. The cold stops being an intruder and becomes more like a companion nudging you awake. A lively, bright sensation travels up your arm, spreading across your chest. A sense of focus, of alertness, of presence. One mainstream historical fact flickers into your thoughts. Medieval pilgrims often sought out sacred springs not only for spiritual purification, but also because many believed these waters had healing properties, cooling fevers, easing aches, awakening the mind. Cold wasn't just discomfort, it was medicine. Then a quirkier detail surfaces. Some pilgrims would carry a small vial of spring water the entire length of their journey, not to drink, but to dab on their foreheads whenever they needed a courage refresh. Basically medieval energy shots, but without the questionable ingredients and neon labels. You glance at the young woman's wooden bucket. Maybe she's doing the same thing. Maybe she's planning to carry that freezing slush all the way to a distant shrine, splashing herself awake every time her feet beg her to sit for a week. Historians still argue whether these pilgrim cold water rituals were about actual faith, communal identity, or simply the fact that cold springs were some of the only reliable water sources in winter. But looking at the crowd around you, faces peaceful, voices soft, breath steady, it feels like a merge of all three. The older man in the indigo cloak wades further into the spring, water swirling around him in silver ribbons. He exhales, slow and controlled, and gestures for others to join. A few do, stepping carefully onto the slick stones, their cloaks floating around them like muted flags. You do not join. You're brave, but not that brave. Instead, you scoop up a handful of water and splash it onto your face. The shock is immediate. A tiny gasp escapes you, half surprise, half complaint, but then your senses open wide, as if someone just flung open the shutters in your mind. You blink. The world looks clearer, sharper, almost beautiful. The string of pilgrims moves through the scene like a slow river of color. Russet, teal, indigo, sage, and for a moment, everything feels timeless. You sit there longer than you expect, dipping your fingers again and again, letting the cold sharpen you without overwhelming you. You begin to understand why people walked hundreds of miles for springs like this, why they believed in their strange, almost mystical power. When you finally stand, droplets roll down your cheeks like tiny beads of brightness. The young woman retrieves her bucket, gives you a knowing nod, and joins the moving line of travelers heading onward along the road. You follow, your steps lighter now. The cold has done its work, not with force, but with a gentleness disguised as discomfort. A medieval reminder that clarity often comes from places you'd rather avoid. As the path winds between the hills, you feel connected to the earth, to the past, to the countless travelers who once walked here seeking renewal in the most unglamorous, icy form possible. And strangely, you feel ready for whatever comes next. You walk with the pilgrims until their path slowly bends away from yours, trailing off into a winding ribbon of color across the frosted hills. Their silhouettes shrink into the morning haze, soft-edged, steady, and strangely comforting, before fading entirely into the horizon. And just like that, the road opens up again, quiet and wide and waiting for you. Your footsteps crunch over the thin crust of ice forming on the dirt road. The sun has climbed higher now, turning the air from icy silver to pale gold. You breathe in the crispness and exhale a cloud that drifts lazily upward, as though even your breath wants to take its time this morning. Ahead, you spot the rooftops of a medieval town, timber frames, straw thatching, smoke rising from chimneys in lazy curls. The buildings cluster together like old friends huddled against the winter chill. You head toward it, drawn by the gentle murmur of daily life waking up. As you enter the town, the world becomes deliciously noisy. Wooden wheels rattling over cobblestones, vendors calling out half-hearted morning greetings, chickens arguing about absolutely nothing. The smells hit next: fresh bread, damp wool, a hint of fish that probably should have been eaten yesterday. You weave through narrow lanes until you reach a long, low stone building tucked between a baker's stall and a tanner's workshop. A wooden sign hangs over the door, etched with a carving of a hammer and chisel. A guild house. Inside, it's warmer. A large hearth crackles at the far end, its flames painting the wooden beams with shifting amber light. Long tables fill the center of the room, and around them gather men and women of every craft. Blacksmiths with soot-stained sleeves, weavers draped in dyed wool, carpenters with shavings clinging to their cloaks. What catches your eye, though, is not the tools or the chatter. It's the long row of wooden basins lining one wall, each filled to the brim with clear, icy water. A few craftworkers are already there, splashing their faces, dipping hands up to the wrists, rubbing cold water along the back of their necks, as if they're performing some secret ritual. Their expressions range from pleasantly refreshed to actively regretting life choices, which feels like the appropriate emotional spectrum for medieval hygiene. You edge closer, watching as a young carpenter, his cloak dyed a muted teal, cups water in his hands and presses it firmly to his cheeks. He sucks in a sharp breath through his teeth, then exhales slowly, visibly unwinding. His shoulders drop, his eyes sharpen. He looks like someone who just rebooted his entire nervous system. You're curious, obviously, and before you can even pretend otherwise, a broad-shouldered woman, likely a blacksmith, judging by the burn marks on her leather apron, smiles and nudges a basin toward you. "Well," she asks in a warm, raspy voice, "you look like you've walked through morning frost and lived to tell it. Might as well finish the job." You kneel and dip your hands into the basin. Cold, very cold, a cold with character. It isn't monastery cold or sacred spring cold. This is practical cold, the kind that's been sitting in a room all night, minding its own business, unaware it was destined to snap you awake. You splash your face. Immediate shock, immediate brightness, immediate moment of questioning every decision that led you here. Then, a soft wave of clarity rolling over you. One mainstream historical fact clicks into place. Medieval guilds sometimes enforced hygiene-related rules to promote health among their members. Cold water washing was part of that, believed to boost alertness before long work hours. Some guild charters even mentioned morning rinses as part of a craftsman's discipline. But then comes a quirkier detail. A few guilds, notably in Northern Europe, kept basins of cold water near the entrance not just for cleanliness, but as a built-in sobriety test. If a worker couldn't handle the water without swearing loudly or stumbling backward, the masters considered them unfit for work that day. You glance at the blacksmith woman and silently hope she's not evaluating your splash reaction. You prefer not to fail the medieval ice face challenge before breakfast. Historians still argue whether such practices were widespread or more regional quirks, but the evidence suggests that cold water had a ritualistic, communal importance. It wasn't just about hygiene. It was about mental reset, group discipline, and shared routine. An early, unintentional version of today's team cold plunge trend, only without the influencers yelling into waterproof microphones. The blacksmith dips her arms into a basin up to the elbows, winces, then grins. Clears the fog, she says. Makes the work feel sharper. You nod, rubbing a fresh wave of cold across your forehead. And she's right. Your mind feels clear, alert, almost buzzing, like someone straightened the messy shelves inside your brain. Around you, the guild house continues waking up. Someone sets a loaf of bread on a table. Someone else stirs a pot of porridge over the fire. A group of apprentices practice knot tying with lengths of rope, their fingers moving quickly despite the cold. Try it on your wrists, the carpenter suggests from beside you. His voice is friendly, calm, the kind of tone people use when sharing tips that actually work. You dip your wrists under the water. The sensation shoots upward like a trail of cold lightning. But instead of jolting you, it centers you, grounds you. It's the medieval equivalent of hitting the refresh button on your internal browser. The guild master, an elderly man with a white beard braided neatly into 2 strands, steps into the room. He surveys the basins with a stern but approving nod. Then, in a voice so calm it almost echoes, he says, "A cool mind makes steady hands." You could stitch that on a pillow. The apprentices line up, each approaching a basin in turn, splashing themselves with varying degrees of bravery. Some squeak, some grunt. One makes a sound like a distressed goose, and the blacksmith stifles a laugh. But after each splash, the change is visible. Shoulders straighten, eyes focus, breath steadies. It's a beautifully simple routine. No chanting, no ceremony, no icy agony for enlightenment like the monastery. Just ordinary people using cold water to click into a better version of themselves before tackling the day's work. You stay a little longer, soaking in the gentle chaos of the guild house. The smell of hot porridge blends with the scent of cold water and freshly chopped wood. Sunbeams drift through the small windows, illuminating dust motes that dance lazily in the warm air. Finally, you stand, drying your face with a cloth hanging nearby. Your skin tingles with that bright, lively buzz that only cold water can give. The guild master gives you a small nod, as if approving your participation in the morning ritual. You step out into the street again, the cold air wrapping around you like a familiar cloak. The town feels more vibrant now, more awake. Or maybe it's you. As you walk, your fingers still damp from the basin, you realize something. Each place you visited, each group you've joined, monks, travelers, pilgrims, craftsmen, they all used cold water not as punishment, but as connection to the world, to their work, to themselves. And as the morning deepens, you find yourself wondering where the journey will lead next, and what other cold, clarifying customs medieval life still is waiting for you. Night settled like a thick wool cloak over the mountain outpost, its silence broken only by the low murmur of wind brushing through cedar branches. From a distance, the fortress looked almost unreal. Lanterns glowing behind wooden slats, faint trails of smoke drifting upward as if the building itself sighed with the long fatigue of winter. Inside, the samurai stood by the open veranda, his silhouette framed by the pale moonlight that spilled across the polished floorboards like silver water. He inhaled deeply. The cold stung his nose, sharp and pure, but it carried a certain clarity too, like a reminder that life, even in its harshest form, was still here, waiting. Behind him, the kettle on the brazier whispered a soft, steady hiss. It was the same kettle he had carried since his youth, dented on one side, the handle wrapped in faded indigo cloth. It had traveled across provinces with him, endured battles, storms, and endless journeys through lonely mountain passes. It was insignificant to the world, but to him it was a companion, one he trusted more than most people. He poured the hot water into a lacquered bowl and watched steam coil upward. His hands were rough, scarred from years of sword practice. Yet when he whisked the bright green matcha, his movements were deliberate, almost tender. He was tired, more tired than he ever admitted, but his gestures remained precise. Ceremony was not a thing one performed only when strong. It was a discipline that steadied the mind, especially when strength faltered. The young stable boy watched quietly from the doorway, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He had been assigned to night duty, and though he tried to hide it, the weight of darkness unsettled him. The samurai noticed this without turning. "Cold?" the warrior asked, his voice low and warm. The boy nodded. The samurai lifted a cup of matcha, turning it toward the boy. The child hesitated, as if unsure whether he was allowed to accept such an offering. But then he stepped forward and took the cup with both hands, bowing slightly. "Drink slowly," the samurai said. "Let the warmth move through you." The boy obeyed. The bitterness hit him first, sharp and grassy, but the warmth spread fast. Into his fingers, his chest, his stomach. His shoulders relaxed. Something unspoken passed between them, a gentle acknowledgement that even in a place built for battle, softness did not weaken a man. Outside, snowflakes drifted lazily from the sky, each one catching the lantern glow before settling on the wooden railing. The samurai stepped onto the veranda, wearing only a simple hunter-green kimono. He closed his eyes as the snow touched his face. The boy watched with confusion. "Doesn't it burn?" the boy asked, noticing how the cold clung to the warrior's eyelashes like tiny glass beads. "It burns just enough," the samurai answered. "Cold teaches the body to wake. Warmth teaches the body to rest. Together, they keep us balanced." The boy frowned thoughtfully. "Like your breathing exercises." "Yes," the samurai replied. "Everything comes from balance." The samurai's gaze drifted toward the tree line. Somewhere beyond the cedar shadows lay the narrow trail the scouts used. He had sent 2 men earlier in the day, and though they were skilled, a twisting unease tugged at him now. He sensed the mountains shifting, the way experienced warriors often sensed a change before it became visible. Perhaps it was nothing. Perhaps it was everything. He turned to the boy again. "Stoke the fire. Keep the kettle warm. I'll return shortly." He stepped into his sandals, tied his cloak loosely, and walked down the steps into the untouched snow. The air felt colder here, away from the lanterns. Each breath seemed to crystallize in his throat, and each footstep sank with a soft crunch. But it was peaceful, so peaceful that the world felt temporarily paused, as if nature itself waited for him to take the next step. As he approached the northern wall, he saw one of the guards leaning over the parapet, squinting into the distance. The guard straightened immediately. "Sir, something moves in the valley below." The samurai joined him, scanning the darkness. At first, there was nothing, only the shifting mist that clung to the snow. But then a flicker, a small lantern bobbing rhythmically between the trees, moving slowly, carefully. One of the scouts, but only one. The samurai's stomach tightened. "Open the gate," he commanded quietly. The scout stumbled inside minutes later, panting, his boots soaked through. Snow caked his hair and shoulders. His face was pale, not just from cold but from shock. "They're coming," the scout choked out. "Not bandits. A proper force. Armored. Organized." "How many?" the samurai asked. 20, maybe more." They moved like they knew the terrain. The samurai's jaw clenched, though his voice remained calm. "And the other scout?" The silence that followed was answer enough. The samurai closed his eyes briefly, not in grief, but in acknowledgement. Loss was part of duty, but remembering mattered. "Get warm," he told the scout. "You've done well." The scout bowed deeply, then hurried toward the fire hall. The samurai turned toward the courtyard. The lanterns flickered, brushing warm light across the snow. The boy stood at the doorway, clutching the matcha cup with both hands, eyes wide. The samurai walked toward him with slow, steady steps. He did not want fear to spread. Fear was a fire that moved faster than any army. The boy swallowed. Are we in danger? Danger is part of life here, the samurai said gently. But fear is not required. The boy nodded, though uncertainty lingered. The samurai rested a hand on his shoulder. Tonight, you will help keep the fire alive. That is your task. Do it well, and you protect us all. The boy straightened a little, pride blooming through the worry. The samurai returned to the brazier, reheated the kettle, and whisked another bowl of matcha. Slower this time, more meditative. The mountain hummed quietly. Snow fell. The scent of cedar smoke curled through the air like a soft, reassuring lullaby. Before long, other warriors gathered around the brazier, called by an unspoken signal. They shed their cloaks, wiping snow from their armor. The firelight caught the iron plates, turning them amber and gold. Someone passed wooden cups. Someone else shared rice cakes left over from the evening meal. What could have been a scene of looming dread instead became one of quiet unity. The samurai stood among them, feeling the warmth spread through the small circle of bodies. His presence steadied them, calm, confident, unwavering. Rest. Prepare, he said softly. At dawn, we hold the pass. But in his eyes, there was no anger, no thirst for glory, only the simple, resolute understanding that protecting others required both strength and serenity. That tonight, like every night, began with stillness. The snow continued falling. The mountain continued breathing. And inside the small outpost, warriors gathered around the comforting ritual of tea, anchored not by fear, but by a shared sense of purpose that no enemy could easily break. Dawn moved slowly through the mountains, as if hesitant to disturb the fragile stillness of the night before. First came a faint paling of the sky, an almost invisible softening of black into muted charcoal. Then a thin line of pale rose light brushed the ridge, like the first stroke of a painter testing a new color. The snow took that faint glow and amplified it, turning the entire world into a wash of pastel blues and warm pinks. Inside the outpost, the warriors stirred to life, though quietly, as if honoring the mountain's deliberate awakening. Boots thudded lightly, armor clinked in soft, muted rhythms. The fire crackled with a low, steady heartbeat, but no one spoke loudly. Their movements held a kind of reverence. They knew that once the sun fully rose, silence would be a luxury no longer certain. The samurai stepped into the courtyard, his breath rising in small white clouds. His cloak hung over his shoulders, silver frost forming along the edges where snow had melted and refrozen. He carried no helmet yet, only the layered garments of raw silk and cotton beneath his armor, dyed in calm shades of forest green and deep russet. Across his back, the handle of his katana glinted faintly in the first hints of morning light. He paused for a moment, feeling the air with his senses before opening his eyes fully. The mountain felt different today. Not hostile, not angry, simply alert, as if it, too, had sensed the approaching footfalls in the valley below. The boy from the night before appeared at the courtyard door, clutching a small wooden tray in trembling hands. On it rested a steaming bowl of matcha and a few pieces of dried persimmon. His hair was still wild from sleep, and his face was pale with a mix of worry and pride. I made it as you showed me, the boy said, though his voice wavered. The samurai accepted the tray, nodding once. Good. Share some with the others. Duties are lighter when shared. The boy hurried off, almost tripping on the snow-dusted stones, but he kept the tray steady. The samurai watched him with a faint smile, one that faded slowly as he turned toward the northern parapet. A scout approached from the shadows of the wall. They're closer, he whispered, still moving quietly, but not hiding. The samurai ascended the stairs to the wall. From the top, the view of the valley stretched wide before him. Vast, pale, untouched except for the dark line of trees cutting through the snow like a seam in cloth. The air was so cold it felt sharp against his cheeks, each breath a reminder that living sometimes hurt, but in a necessary way. Then movement, shadows shifting between trees, a scattering of black shapes advancing steadily. The enemy. He did not flinch. Instead, he studied their formation, their posture, the spacing between men, the way their feet pressed into the snow in careful, deliberate patterns. These were no common brigands. These were trained, disciplined, purposeful. Behind him, More warriors climbed the steps, gathering in silence. Some narrowed their eyes against the cold glare. Others steadied their breathing. Long inhales, long exhales, the same way the samurai had taught them over the years. "Do not meet fear with noise," the samurai said softly. "Meet it with clarity." They nodded. The enemy moved slowly, almost ceremonially, taking their time, as if assessing the outpost from afar. Perhaps they understood the terrain. Perhaps they underestimated it. Or perhaps they simply believed numbers would swallow any obstacle. But the pass narrowed ahead, enough for only 5 men across. A natural advantage, a gift from the mountain itself. He breathed deeply, letting the cold settle into his lungs. The sharpness brought him awake, focused, anchored. The morning sky brightened behind him, turning the snow along the parapet into shimmering gold white. "Prepare positions," he murmured. The warriors moved with that same quiet reverence, dragging small crates to block the narrow stairways, fastening extra planks on the wall, checking arrows, adjusting straps. Their faces remained calm, even the youngest among them, not because they lacked fear, but because they moved with purpose, and purpose steadied even trembling hands. The samurai drank from the matcha bowl, the bitterness grounding him, the warmth spreading like a sun beneath his ribs. He closed his eyes for a moment as the steam brushed his cheeks. This tea, he thought, had been shared across centuries, drunk by monks in mountain temples, by healers before long journeys, by warriors in moments just like this. Moments where clarity mattered more than brute strength. He placed the empty bowl back on the tray and descended the steps. In the courtyard, the boy approached again, his eyes wide. "Will we survive?" he asked. A question asked in every era, by every young one who stands at the edge of danger for the first time. The samurai knelt, so their eyes met. "We cannot choose how the world arrives," he said gently. "Only how we greet it." The boy swallowed hard. "But I'm scared." "So am I," the samurai admitted. The boy blinked in surprise. "But courage," the warrior continued, "is when you walk forward anyway." The boy nodded slowly, absorbing, learning, growing in that small moment. He tightened his grip on the tray and stood taller, even if only by a few centimeters. The samurai rose, turning toward the gate. "Take shelter," he told the boy. "Keep the fire alive. When men fight, warmth becomes even more precious." The boy bowed deeply and hurried toward the inner hall. The warriors assembled near the gate as the enemy shapes grew clearer in the valley. The sun crept higher, gilding the men's armor, illuminating their breath in small puffs of white vapor. A hush spread across the outpost, the kind of hush that precedes storms, decisions, and the irreversible passage from one fate to another. The samurai moved to the front of his men, his footsteps steady though his heartbeat pulsed with quiet thunder. He lifted his gaze to the sky for a brief moment. Clouds drifted lazily, lit with soft amber light. The world, in all its quiet, remained breathtakingly beautiful. Even now, especially now, he placed his hand lightly on the hilt of his sword, not drawing it yet, only acknowledging its presence. "Today," he said softly, "we protect what stands behind us." The warriors straightened. "We hold the pass." Their breaths synchronized, their gazes sharpened, their spirits aligned. The mountain wind brushed through the courtyard like a final blessing. The enemy drew closer, and in the outpost above the snow-covered world, the samurai prepared not with rage or fury, but with the serene, resolute calm of a man who understood deeply that strength came from stillness, and stillness from understanding, and understanding from a lifetime spent learning how to breathe through every season of life. The enemy line finally reached the narrow throat of the valley, and the air shifted, subtly, but unmistakably. You feel it the way you feel a change in weather before you ever see a cloud. A quiet tightening, a sense that the mountain itself is holding its breath, waiting to see what humans will do next. The sound of marching feet traveled strangely in the cold, bouncing off stone in delayed echoes that made the force seem even larger than it was. You stand near the first defensive post, hands resting lightly on the wooden railing beside you. Snow clings to the grain of the beams, melting slowly under your fingertips. The outpost behind you is eerily calm, just the occasional rustle of fabric or the creak of a bowstring being tested. Even the fire in the courtyard has softened into low, glowing embers, as though refusing to interrupt the tension of the morning. The samurai steps forward, not rushing, not dramatic, just steady. His presence alone seems to settle the air, as if the mountain recognizes something familiar in him, someone who doesn't disturb its silence without reason. Below, the opposing commander finally raises a hand. His armor glints in rough, chopped highlights, duller than the polished plates of your outpost warriors, but heavier, bulkier. His men spread slightly, forming a crescent shape around him. Their breath streams upward in slow curls, mixing with the pale morning mist. Nobody moves. Nobody calls out. The mountain wind sighs between the pines, brushing frost from their branches in a soft cascade of white. You watch as the samurai steps to the edge of the path, close enough that, if both forces shouted, they could be heard clearly from one end of the pass to the other. Except no one shouts. The samurai simply raises one hand in greeting, palm outward, a gesture of acknowledgement rather than submission or threat. The opposing commander tilts his head, clearly surprised. He hadn't expected the outpost to be so composed. He'd expected fear, maybe scrambling, maybe the clatter of hurried preparations. He hadn't expected serenity. "Who commands this pass?" the man finally calls out, his voice cutting through the cold like the scrape of steel on stone. The samurai answers calmly, "This outpost is under the protection of the northern shogunate. State your intent." Even his tone seems to carry warmth, the kind born from quiet confidence rather than arrogance. The commander snorts, sending a puff of steam upward. "We seek passage. Step aside, and no blood needs to stain your snow." The samurai studies him, his expression unreadable. Snowflakes drift between them like drifting pages torn from an old scroll. You wait for the outburst, for the typical bravado, the bold warnings, the predictable exchange of threats that fills so many tales of conflict. But instead, the samurai's reply is almost disarmingly gentle. "This mountain is not mine to surrender, nor yours to claim." A few of your fellow warriors exchange looks, as if trying not to smile. It's not an insult, exactly, but it carries a soft sting, like telling someone they've worn their shoes on the wrong feet. The commander stiffens. "Do not test my patience." The samurai inclines his head. "Patience is a precious resource. One should conserve it." A faint chuckle ripples among your ranks. Even you have to bite back a smile. Humor, it turns out, is a surprisingly effective shield. Down below, the enemy force bristles. You can practically feel the frustration rising in them like heat from a simmering pot. Their commander lifts his arm sharply, and for a moment, you think he's going to order an attack. Instead, he signals his archers. The samurai notices instantly. His hand drops calmly to rest on the hilt of his sword. Behind you, your own archers steady their bows, breath synchronizing in disciplined, controlled rhythm. Historians still argue whether warriors in mountain outposts developed special breathing patterns for cold weather combat, or whether they were simply trying not to sneeze in front of their commanders. But either way, the calm exhalations add a quiet cadence to the moment. The mountain holds steady. You hold steady. Even time seems to hold steady. The opposing archers draw. You can see their fingers tighten on the bowstrings, frost cracking along the curves of the wood. Then, a crow lands on the branch of a nearby pine, cawing loudly as if scolding everyone for the unnecessary tension. For a ridiculous moment, nothing happens because everyone turns to look at the bird. You swear you hear it caw again, louder this time, like a village elder telling rowdy children to knock it off. The samurai glances up at the crow with a raised eyebrow. A tiny smile touches the corner of his mouth. Then he steps fully into the center of the path, between the archers and your warriors. He doesn't draw his sword. He doesn't shout commands. He simply stands there, an unmoving shape in green and russet cloth, cloak fluttering lightly at his sides. "You may fire," he says to the enemy, "but understand what the mountain will do with your arrows." The commander hesitates. What does that mean? The samurai lifts a hand toward the ridge above. You follow his gesture, and you see it. Snow. A lot of snow, balanced precariously along the steep upper shelf of the mountainside above the pass, where the morning sun has just begun to melt the edges. A potential avalanche. You swallow hard. The enemy archers look uncertain. Even the opposing commander narrows his eyes, trying to estimate whether this is bluff or truth. One of your own warriors leans close to you and whispers, "Did he plan that?" You whisper back. Historians still argue whether he noticed by chance or positioned us here on purpose. Down below, the enemy commander lowers his hand a fraction. Not completely, but enough. The samurai's voice carries smoothly across the distance. This pass is narrow. If the snow falls, none will escape quickly. A long silence follows. Wind whistles softly through the rocks. The crow caws again, because apparently it has opinions. Finally, the commander pulls his arm down fully. "We will return," he says, teeth clenched. But not today. He signals his men. The line slowly retracts, step by grudging step, dissolving once more into shadow and pine and the slow drift of mountain mist. You breathe, deeply, shakily, gratefully. The samurai doesn't move until the last figure has disappeared into the trees. Only then does he let out the quietest exhale, the kind only those nearest him could ever notice. He turns back toward the outpost. "You see," he says softly, "sometimes strength is simply knowing when nature is on your side." One of the older warriors steps forward, shaking his head. "That snow may not have fallen. Or it may have," the samurai replies. "That is the nature of mountains, and of people." You glance at the ridge again. The snow sits heavy and unmoved. But the enemy didn't know that. And sometimes, you realize, fear holds more weight than certainty. The outpost does not erupt into cheers. It doesn't burst into triumphant roars, or clashing weapons, or wild celebrations the way storytellers sometimes exaggerate moments like this. Instead, something softer happens, something far more fitting for a place nestled in the quiet ribs of a mountain. Relief settles over the courtyard like a warm blanket. A few warriors exhale long-held breaths. Someone leans against the wall, pressing a hand to their chest, as if steadying a runaway heart. Another simply nods to the samurai, a gesture filled with gratitude rather than victory. Even the wind seems to loosen its grip, brushing the snowflakes sideways with a gentler hand. You feel it too, the strange, floating lightness that comes after tension thaws. Your fingers are still tingling, your shoulders still tight, but warmth begins to seep back into your limbs as if your body is slowly remembering how to exist without bracing for impact. The samurai walks back into the courtyard without theatrics, his cloak trailing thin arcs in the snow. The others make way for him, respecting his quiet, steady presence. He pauses by the central fire pit, where the embers glow beneath a scattering of ash, their deep red pulses almost hypnotic. "Keep the defenses ready," he says, not harshly, not urgently, just firmly. Their retreat won't soothe their pride. They may test us again. A murmur of acknowledgement ripples through the warriors. No one questions him. His words settle into the cold air like stones dropped into still water, sending out ripples, but no panic. You step closer, drawn by the soft glow of the embers and the steady rhythm of the samurai's breathing. His armor carries a faint sheen of frost, tiny crystals sparkling along the plates like a thin dusting of stars. He notices you approach and shifts slightly to make room beside the fire. "You did well," he says. You blink. "I didn't do anything." He shakes his head. "Calm is a contribution." You let that settle. It's not a compliment you've heard before. In fact, if someone in the modern world told you that your calm helped in a crisis, you'd assume they were politely saying you stayed out of the way. But here, now, in this fragile mountain dawn, the words feel genuine, sincere, true. A few warriors drift toward the inner hall for food or warmth. Others begin checking the walls again, testing supports, examining arrow stocks, adjusting shields. Their movements blend together in a kind of understated ritual. Nothing flashy, no heroic poses, just people continuing their duty with the muted diligence of those who know survival is built from repetition, not spectacle. The boy from earlier rushes out of the hall, cheeks flushed, hair still sticking up like he fought a pillow and lost. He skids slightly on the snow, catching himself at the last second. "Are they gone?" he asks, eyes wide. "For now," the samurai replies. The boy lets out a sigh so dramatic that 3 warriors snort quietly. He doesn't notice. Instead, he clutches the sleeve of the samurai's robe. I kept the fire alive, like you said, he says. I didn't let go out once. The samurai crouches to meet his eyes. Then you protected this outpost as much as any of us. The boy beams. Truly? He asks, voice wobbling with pride. Truly. The boy nods, so hard his hair flops in his face. He brushes it aside, then looks toward the mountains, squinting dramatically as if he might personally scare off the retreating enemy by sheer determination. Behind him, a warrior whispers to another. Historians still argue whether bravery can be taught or whether some boys are born with too much of it. You stifle a laugh. The samurai rises and walks toward the storage shed. You follow automatically, unsure whether you're meant to help or simply drawn by the sense that something important, something subtle, is happening. Inside, the shed is dimly lit by a small oil lamp hanging from a wooden beam. Bundles of dried herbs line the walls, tied with strips of cloth. Small wooden crates are stacked neatly in the corner, labeled with charcoal symbols. The air smells of cedar, dust, and faint traces of mint. The samurai retrieves a small wooden box and sets it on a table. What's that? You ask. He opens the lid. Inside are several objects arranged with careful precision. A folded cloth, a few small flasks, and, most unexpectedly, a smooth stone the color of river clay. Its surface is polished, as if someone spent years rubbing it between warm palms. It was given to me by a monk, he says quietly. Long ago. He picks up the stone and holds it between his fingers. He told me that in moments of uncertainty, I should listen to the mountain. You tilt your head. The mountain. Yes, he says simply. To its patience, to its quiet, to its endurance. He sets the stone down gently, almost reverently. Many mistake silence for weakness, he continues, but mountains show us otherwise. You lean back against a wooden beam, letting the dim light stretch across your vision. His words fit strangely well with everything you've experienced here so far. The stillness, the cold, the calm strategic mind that chose a bluff over a battle, the waiting, the watching. Is that how you knew the enemy wouldn't attack? You ask. He gives the faintest smile. I didn't know, but the mountain knew. You open your mouth to question that, but stop, because maybe, in this place, that is an answer. And maybe the mountain truly did speak in its own slow, deliberate way, through the snowpack, through the wind, through the cold stillness that seemed to freeze the air around everyone. The samurai closes the box, ties its rope gently, and places it back on the shelf. Then he looks at you with eyes that seem older than the stone itself. Come, he says softly. There is work to be done. Peace is not maintained by waiting alone. You step outside again, blinking as daylight catches your eyes. The sun has risen higher, turning the snowfields into ripples of blinding white and soft silver. The sky is crisp blue, clear enough that you can see distant ridgelines etched against the horizon. You notice something else too. The outpost feels more alive now, vibrating not with fear, but with purpose. The earlier tension has transformed into a quiet determination, the kind that shapes nations, or at least keeps one small mountain pass from collapsing under pressure. Warriors begin practicing drills in slow, controlled motions, their breaths forming rhythmic clouds. Others repair small cracks in the wooden walls. The boy carries buckets of fresh snow to melt for tea, humming a little victory tune. You stand in the middle of it all, letting the warmth of the sun brush your face. For a place built to withstand conflict, it feels remarkably peaceful, almost healing. You take a deep breath. The cold expands your lungs with a faint ache that soon melts into something soothing, something clarifying. And for the first time since the enemy appeared at dawn, you feel your heartbeat finally match the pace of the mountain around you. Slow, steady, unhurried, like the world has exhaled. And now, so can you. The sun rose slowly over the mountains. Not harsh, not blinding, but soft, as if the peaks themselves had decided that light was a gift to be unfurled gradually. Snow clung to the edges of the outpost roof, sparkling like countless tiny crystals, each one a small miracle, each a quiet reminder of the cold night they had survived. You watch, noticing that your hands still retain the warmth from the matcha you drank earlier, a gentle glow spreading from your chest to your fingers. It is a warmth that touches more than your body. It touches your mind, the kind that makes you aware, in the most unassuming way, that you are entirely present in this small patch of mountain pass. The samurai walks slowly along the snowy path, each foot placed deliberately, each breath a staccato rhythm that seems in perfect harmony with the world around him. You follow him, your own steps muffled in the thick snow, feeling almost as if you are moving through a dream where every sound is softened, every movement purposeful. The air smells of pine, cold, sweet, and faintly metallic with the distant scent of melting ice. Tiny flakes still drift down, landing softly on your hair and shoulders, a reminder that winter waits for no one, not even the most disciplined warriors. He stops at the edge of a narrow ravine that cuts through the mountain like a silver scar. From here, the valley below stretches out, shrouded in mist and the faint, uncertain light of early morning. You squint through the fog and see the distant shadows of trees, their branches bending under snow, and you feel the immense quiet that seems to fill the world, a hush so complete it almost presses against your ears. Even the wind, though present, has a polite restraint tonight, rustling the cedars in a low, reverent murmur. The samurai kneels briefly, placing his hand against the cold stone of the wall. He inhales deeply, letting the frigid air enter his lungs, then exhales slowly, allowing it to escape in long, controlled puffs that swirl like ghostly ribbons in the morning light. You notice the subtle motion, the discipline, the ritual embedded even in this mundane act. It is a quiet preparation, an unseen alignment of body and spirit, as essential to him as sharpening a blade or polishing armor. You follow his gaze down the ravine. The previous night's scouts, or perhaps others sent from nearby posts, have left faint tracks in the snow, lines that bend and break, hinting at movement, strategy, presence. It is subtle, almost invisible, but a trained eye, like his, sees everything. You remember that historians still argue whether this meticulous attention to detail was instinct or deliberate training, but in this moment, it feels like both. Each snowflake, each footprint, each whisper of wind becomes part of a narrative that only patience and observation can read. The boy from the courtyard appears again, clutching a tray with fresh bowls of matcha and a few rice cakes. His hair is still wild, damp from the snow, and his breath comes in uneven clouds as he approaches. "Master," he whispers, "I brought tea." The samurai nods, a simple gesture, yet it carries acknowledgement, approval, and a quiet encouragement all at once. He accepts a bowl and hands one to you. The steam rises, curling toward your face in lazy, fragrant tendrils. You sip, the earthy bitterness mingling with the warmth, grounding your thoughts, slowing your heartbeat. The boy watches you nervously, as though seeing you drink is itself a lesson. Perhaps it is. Perhaps it is a lesson in presence, in patience, in understanding that small acts can carry great weight. "Drink slowly," the samurai says, his voice calm and soft, almost blending with the wind. "Let it anchor you." You obey, savoring each sip, feeling the warmth seep into your chest, spreading outward, into your hands, down to your toes. It is soothing in a way that nothing else has been so far today. And as you drink, the snow around you seems to settle, the branches stop creaking, and even the distant ravine appears to pause in anticipation. The world is quiet, patient, listening. After a few moments, the samurai sets his bowl aside and stands, the subtle authority in his posture demanding attention without forcing it. He gestures toward the narrow trail leading up the mountain, the path that scouts may use, the line that could bring either danger or opportunity. "We must watch," he says simply, not with fear, with understanding. You follow him along the edge of the outpost, boots sinking slightly into the fresh snow, each step deliberate. The other warriors stir as they notice him moving. They form a slow, silent line along the walls, checking weapons, adjusting armor, whispering to each other in muted tones. Their movements are quiet, precise, controlled. Even the faint crunch of snow underfoot seems part of the rhythm, a carefully measured percussion in the symphony of vigilance. From this vantage point, you see the valley below in more detail. The mist clings to the trees like gauze. The shadows stretch long and fragile, and every small movement seems amplified. A deer steps cautiously among the cedars, pausing mid-stride as if aware of your watchful eyes. You feel your heartbeat synchronize, not with fear, but with observation. You notice the slight bow of its head, the flick of its tail, the way the frost on its back glitters in a fleeting, perfect moment. Even in this tense vigil, the beauty of the world insists on itself. The samurai steps closer to the edge and kneels again, observing the patterns of the snow, the angles of the ridges, the faint echoes of the wind. You crouch beside him, imitating his stillness, feeling your mind slow, your muscles relax, your thoughts settle into a gentle rhythm. The world feels vast, infinite, yet contained, as though the mountains themselves are both guardian and audience to this moment of quiet preparation. Then a crow lands on a nearby branch, its black feathers slick with snow. It caws loudly, a sudden, sharp intrusion that makes your ears ring. The warriors start slightly. Even the samurai's eyes flick toward it, though only for a second. The bird tilts its head, staring, as if it knows more than any of you. For a brief moment, the tension dissolves in absurdity. The boy snickers, muffled behind his hands, and you allow yourself the smallest, quiet smile. The samurai exhales, a long, measured breath. Even in vigilance, he says, voice low and calm, there is space for humor. The crow reminds us not to take everything too seriously. You nod, feeling the warmth of that lesson as keenly as the matcha in your stomach. The sun rises higher now, golden and soft, spilling over the peaks in gentle streams. The mist begins to dissipate, revealing the full breadth of the valley, the ridges, the trees, the distant ridges where shadows hide. You realize, with a quiet thrill, that even in potential danger, there is serenity. Even in watchfulness, there is calm. Even when every moment could bring confrontation, there is room to breathe, to sip tea, to notice the crow, to feel the snow, to exist fully here and now. And for a long, still moment, you do. The samurai stands, surveying the valley one last time. Patience, he says simply. The mountain teaches it. The wind teaches it. The snow teaches it. And so do we, if we listen. You let that sink in, feeling it settle deep into your bones. Even as the watch continues, even as the day promises challenges, even as the echoes of possible enemies linger in the valley, there is a steady pulse beneath it all. A rhythm that matches the snow, the wind, the distant call of the crow, and the beat of your own heart. A rhythm that is quiet, calm, and unyielding. And for a moment, the world feels entirely yours. And the snow, the mountains, the outpost, and the samurai all exist in gentle harmony, waiting, watching, breathing together. By the time the afternoon sun begins its gentle descent behind the distant peaks, the world has shifted once again, not violently, not abruptly, but in that soft, inevitable way that only time knows. Shadows stretch long across the courtyard, the snow now softened into dull silver and muted white, reflecting a calm that seems almost sacred. You notice the subtle hush that has returned to the outpost, the kind of quiet that carries a weight of completion, as if the mountain itself approves of what is past and permits a rare moment of rest. The samurai stands at the parapet, eyes scanning the valley one last time. His posture is relaxed, shoulders no longer tense, yet the discipline beneath that calm remains as unyielding as the stone beneath your feet. Even in victory, there is restraint. Even in relief, there is awareness. You watch him, sensing the rhythm of his breath, the slow rise and fall of his chest, the gentle exhale that carries away hours of tension. Around you, the other warriors move quietly, repairing minor damages, brushing snow from roof eaves, checking arrows, and adjusting straps. Every motion is precise, purposeful, yet soft, a dance of survival and continuity. The boy appears once more, carrying another tray of matcha, eyes wide and bright with an almost uncontainable curiosity. He hurries to the samurai's side, shivering slightly in the cool mountain air. "Master," he whispers, holding out the tray with reverent hands. I kept everything ready, just in case." The samurai nods gently, accepting the tray. He raises his bowl to the boy in a faint, approving salute before turning to pour himself a fresh sip. You feel the warmth radiate through him, through the steam curling into the crisp air, and it seems to anchor the entire courtyard. The boy, watching closely, mimics the samurai's movements, awkward at first but gradually finding a rhythm, and you realize that even this small act, the simple preparation of tea, is teaching patience, focus, and calm as much as any drill a weapon could. The snow begins to glimmer under the fading sunlight, each crystal reflecting soft, golden hues. You inhale slowly, the cold biting lightly at your lungs, and yet it sharpens rather than chills, making each sensation more vivid. There is the smell of damp pine, faint smoke from the courtyard fire, and the delicate, earthy scent of the freshly whisked matcha. All of it mingles in a perfect, fleeting symphony that seems designed for reflection, for presence, for letting the world slow its pulse long enough for you to find your own. "Watch the mountain," the samurai murmurs suddenly, almost to himself. His eyes are distant now, tracing the contours of the ridges, the scattered pines, the distant horizon where sky meets snow. It teaches more than we often realize. Patience, timing, balance. His gaze shifts to you, steady, calm, and you understand that he is speaking as much to you as to himself, perhaps even more so. And when we listen carefully, even silence speaks, even stillness moves. You glance around, noticing subtle shifts you might have overlooked. The way a shadow slides along the walls, the slight glimmer of ice on the highest branches, the distant ripple of wind over snowdrifts. Everything feels alive in its own quiet way, teaching you that vigilance does not require tension, that awareness can coexist with calm, that the most profound power is often hidden in softness rather than force. The samurai lowers his gaze to the courtyard, where warriors continue their subtle routines, and he allows himself a small, rare smile. "Courage," he says quietly, "is measured not in the clash of blades, but in the steadiness of the heart, in the willingness to remain present when chaos whispers nearby, in choosing to act with clarity, not impulse." He sips his tea, slow and deliberate, and the ritual seems to radiate serenity across the space, a gentle pulse that softens the edges of fatigue, tension, and worry. You find yourself settling into a corner, drawing your knees close, letting the warmth of the cup in your hands echo through your chest. The boy sits nearby, quiet, watching the samurai with reverence. Occasionally, a crow calls from the ridge, a reminder that even the smallest observers carry their own wisdom. You can't help but smile softly. The absurdity of that tiny, black bird juxtaposed against centuries of warrior discipline is strangely comforting. The crow, in its stubborn presence, seems to validate the idea that life continues, unpredictably, humorously, and always moving, whether one is ready or not. Time stretches thin. Minutes feel like seconds, and seconds like moments suspended in amber. The samurai finally rises, walking slowly to the parapet, resting one hand lightly on the rail, eyes tracing the horizon once more. Even when storms pass, he murmurs, their echoes remain. Memories of fire, frost, conflict, and patience all linger, shaping who we are, how we act, and what we choose to carry forward. The valley below is calm now, shadows lengthening, mist curling lazily through pines and low ridges. You notice the interplay of light and dark, the delicate balance of movement and stillness, and realize that this has been a day of lessons far beyond strategy or combat. It is a lesson in observing, in breathing, in being, and in understanding that presence itself is a form of mastery. Historians still argue whether such insights were deliberate teachings of the samurai, or simply the product of years and constant observation. Yet in this moment, the distinction seems trivial. You feel it, quietly and undeniably. The boy rises, offering another bowl of matcha. The samurai accepts, lifting it slowly to his lips, and for a moment, All three of you, teacher, student, and observer, share a silent communion of warmth, taste, and presence. The world outside might be chaotic, unpredictable, and demanding, yet here, now, it is gentle, harmonious, and soft. You realize that for every lesson in vigilance, strategy, or survival, there exists an equal lesson in slowing down, observing, and simply being. As the light fades further, painting the snow in dusky violet and faint rose, the courtyard seems to exhale with you. The wind whispers through the ridges, the embers in the courtyard fire glow low, and distant mountains shift softly in the haze. The samurai's voice, now a gentle murmur, cuts through the stillness. Remember, what we face is rarely only what we see. Fear, patience, courage, humor, they're all present if we know how to find them. He pauses, letting the words hang in the air, their resonance stretching long and soft, much like the shadows now stretching across the snow. You breathe in, you breathe out. The ritual of the day, of tea, of quiet observation, of survival, and of reflection has transformed into a rhythm inside your own body. You feel it slow you, steady you, remind you that no matter what storms may come, external or internal, there's always space to center yourself, to acknowledge fear and presence, to sip warmth and watch the world with patient eyes. The samurai turns, his gaze softening. We may leave this past tomorrow, or we may stay. The mountain does not demand haste, only respect. He smiles faintly, and you too must learn to move with respect for what is around you, and for what rests within you. You nod, understanding finally, more than words could express, that survival, mastery, and wisdom are not always forged in conflict, but often in these quiet moments, when the snow drifts slowly, when the wind is gentle, when matcha steams in your hands, and when your heartbeat finds the rhythm of the mountains themselves. For a long time, none of you speak. The sun continues its descent, and the sky softens into gentle pastels. The courtyard is filled with the soft crackle of embers and the faint rustle of clothing, the kind of sound that reminds you that life is continuing softly, steadily, beautifully. And in that moment, for the first time today, you feel wholly unburdened, fully present, and, strangely, entirely awake within your sleepiness, as if the act of simply watching, breathing, and being is its own kind of victory. The sun has nearly disappeared behind the peaks now, leaving only a faint glow that drifts across the snow like spilled silk. You feel your body sink into the quiet of the courtyard, muscles loosening, shoulders falling away from ears, and even the tension behind your eyes seems to melt. The samurai sits again, not in urgency, not in duty, but in stillness. He cradles his bowl of matcha like a small piece of the world itself, and you realize that this ritual, these simple motions, are more powerful than any battle fought with steel. The boy leans against the wall nearby, softly humming, the sound almost merging with the last whisper of wind threading through the cedars. You notice every subtle detail, the frost on a branch, the uneven snow, the delicate tilt of the distant ridge, and each becomes a kind of lullaby, a visual and auditory thread drawing you toward calm. Every breath feels slower, every exhale gentler, and you let yourself sink fully into that rhythm, like a leaf drifting on a quiet stream. The mountain seems to hold its own breath, waiting with you, patient, eternal, vast. You imagine the cold fading into warmth, the shadows softening, and the echo of the day shrinking into a gentle memory. Even the distant crow has settled, perched quietly, watching, as if nodding approval at this quiet surrender to the moment. And now, as your eyelids grow heavy, your mind slows to a hushed cadence. You are present in the snow, in the wind, in the warmth of tea, in the stillness of the outpost. You are not rushing, not fearing, not resisting. You are here, breathing, witnessing, resting. Let the calm fill every corner of your body. Let the quiet expand into your mind. And know that for tonight, you are safe, steady, and ready to drift into sleep.